there was a lot of angst among Muslims, and this angst had to do with the February lynching of two cattle traders by a group of cow vigilantes or Govt. It looks like there was a concerted effort at mobilizing arms and people by the Muslims of New, stones, Molotov cocktails, guns in some cases, reinforcements from neighboring areas. There have been protests against namaz being offered in public places. Every time there is a Hindu festival, people go around forcing meat shops to close. It's all been building up, and the fact that the administration chose not to act against cow vigilantes has just come back to bite them. In Haryana, for instance, one of the things that they should have really done over the last few years is to get a grip on cow vigilantes. I'm going to start with a personal story, and this is about around the time that I became editor of Hindustan Times. And the first thing you realize when you become editor of a mainstream daily, especially a mainstream daily which has a strong city focus, is that you start looking at metro news. And as one started looking at metro news, little bit Delhi, but also Gurugram, right? Because we also have a Gurugram edition. And the name Nu kept cropping up. And if you go back and look at Hindustan Times archives over the last 5 years, you would see a variety of stories on Nu. And you know, the unfortunate thing, I'm not stereotyping here, but the unfortunate thing is most of these stories are negative. We've done stories on how Nu is the epicenter of the two-wheeler stealing operation, two-wheeler theft operation in the NCR, to such an extent that if your two-wheeler is stolen, there are apparently brokers outside Nu to whom you can go and give a little money and they will find your vehicle and bring it back to you. It's the center of the illegal or country gun making and gun selling business in this part of the country. It is the center of the call center fraud and cyber crime in this part of the country. So it's a very interesting place, and as our data journalists have written in the paper, it's also a region, a district which has extremely poor social, economic and development indicators. But the interesting thing, which our data team has also pointed out, is that hasn't had any communal incidents, right? It's important to note that. All of that, of course, changed on July 31, and it's interesting to see the various characters and the various people involved in what happened on July 31. That was the day when some right-wing Hindu groups were participating or carrying out a procession. Not the first time they're taking out such a procession. They've done it before. Quasi-religious, but also, like all religious processions, a show of strength. And as one of the Haryana BJP lawmakers, Rao Indrajit Singh, as himself pointed out, there were people with swords waving them in the middle of the procession. So it's not as if, and videos have emerged showing people with guns in the procession or among those in the procession. So it's not as if they were unarmed. But this year, what was different was the fact that this entire Mewat region, of which Nu is a part, and part of the region is in Rajasthan, part of it is in Haryana, there was a lot of angst among Muslims, and this angst had to do with the February lynching of two cattle traders by a group of cow vigilantes or Govt. And these are self-styled cow vigilantes who keep coursing the highways in their jeeps. They are fairly well armed, and they chase down any vehicle which is carrying cattle, and sometimes this is just cattle being transported legally, sometimes it is illegal. Doesn't make a difference to them. They usually chase these people down. If the people in the vehicle transporting the cattle are lucky, they get away. If they're unlucky, they get beaten up. If they're extremely unlucky, they get killed. Sometimes the cow vigilantes make videos of this, and in this particular case, the cow vigilante involved, although he didn't make a video of this incident, the police say he's involved because his name is there. was a gentleman called Monu Manesar. And he put out a couple of videos ahead of the religious procession on July 31. The people of the region were already upset that he had not been arrested. He was at large. And there was a lot of confusion after the event during the Chief Minister's press conference when he seemed to suggest that Monu Manesar was not wanted in Haryana, contradicting his own Home Minister, who in an interview said that he was wanted. So clearly there is also some amount of political protection that someone like Monu Manesar gets. So no action had been taken against him. He was still at large, so there was a lot of angst. So when videos of him came out, there were other videos also that came out. There was another person called Bittu Bajrangi. There were a few Muslim men who posted videos. So there's a bunch of videos, but the flashpoint was really the claim made by Monu Manesar that he would be there at the rally. As things turned out, he didn't come to the rally. But now, following this, for almost a week, and Hindustan Times reporting has put this out in detail, our bureau has put this out in detail, it looks like there was a concerted effort at mobilizing arms and people by the Muslims of New, stones, Molotov cocktails, guns in some cases, reinforcements from neighboring areas. So that on the day of the procession, there were stones were thrown, bottles were thrown, shots were fired. There was a little bit of retaliation, not much. The brunt of the violence was borne by the Hindu groups and the policemen who were there. 2 home guards died. Some of the other policemen, including some senior policemen, were pretty badly injured. Many of the injuries were gunshot injuries, pointing to the presence of guns there. But following this, you've had violence even in Gurugram, right, which is headquarters to so many Fortune 500 companies as well as large Indian companies. The brunt of that has been borne by the Muslims. So the whole communal fabric of the district as well as adjoining districts seem to have been disturbed. It's extremely worrying because Gurugram is right on Delhi's doorsteps. The G20 is next month. Something like this should not have happened. But in another way of looking at it is that it was bound to happen, because for the last few years, Haryana, especially Gurugram, has seen significant radicalization on both sides. There have been protests against namaz being offered in public places. Every time there is a Hindu festival, people go around forcing meat shops to close. So it's all been building up, and the fact that the administration chose not to act against cow vigilantes has just come back to bite them. But while that might be a long-standing problem, what is of immediate concern is also the complete failure of the state's intelligence network, right? I mean, they seem to have had no clue. That's of course the more generous view. There is another view that says that there was intelligence input, but that the state chose to ignore it. In fact, just now there has been the transfer of the ASP of the district. He was on leave on that day, but there has been a transfer of the ASP of the district, suggesting that there probably was some intelligence that wasn't acted upon. How do you avoid instances like this, right? Because that is the bigger message, and it's not just a message which pertains to Haryana. I think it's a message that every Indian state and every Indian administrator needs to understand. I think we are now in a situation where the environment is just so fraught that administrations, governments, anyone who is in a position of authority has to be extremely proactive about assessing the risk and the threat that is involved and clamping down on it. And not in terms of pulling the plug on the internet, which seems to be the natural reaction for everything that happens, but actually ensuring that the root causes of these are addressed at a very, very fundamental level. In Haryana, for instance, one of the things that they should have really done over the last few years is to get a grip on cow vigilantes. And we've done a series of stories on this, on how there are certain guidelines that need to be followed when you set up these cow protection committees and things like that, and the state doesn't seem to have followed any of them. And that has resulted in all sorts of other issues flaring up at various points in time, and of course now you've had this conflagration. I'm not for a minute justifying what happened in Nu, because that violence was clearly unwarranted, and the law should take its own course. Those people should be acted upon. And nor for a minute am I saying that we should just ignore the fact that there is a lot of crime that happens in Nu. Just a month ago, we wrote about how the hillocks around Nu are a sort of an informal office for all these guys who sit there with their mobile phones calling up other people and committing all sorts of cyber fraud and cyber crime and various other things. So those things are happening, and obviously you need to crack down on that. You can't go easy on any of that. You have to act against fraudsters, you have to act against people who perpetrate violence, but you also have to address the fundamental issues that are involved in this. I sometimes worry that state administrations are quite happy to allow instances like this happen just before elections. The elections in Haryana are scheduled for the second half of next year. I'm hoping that's not the case, because at this point in time, especially with the G20 happening in Delhi in September, I think we have to make sure that everything is peaceful and everything goes off properly.